In a dusty Texas town, a young mechanic named Ava Collins bought a wrecked 1967 Chevy Impala that everyone else had given up on. No one believed it could be saved, rusted through, engine dead, a lost cause. But Ava saw more than scrap metal. She saw a promise to her late father and a dream worth reviving. What followed was a journey of grit, healing, and heart that transformed not just the car, but an entire community. This unforgettable story of how a broken 1967 Chevy Impala brought people together will stay with you long after the engine stops. Before we dive in, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. The desert sun was dipping low, casting long golden shadows over the outskirts of Marfa, Texas, when a beat-up blue Toyota Tacoma rolled to a stop outside a forgotten junkyard, the kind of place time gave up on. Out stepped a young woman, tall, lean, and dust-covered, her hair tied back in a messy braid, oil-stained jeans, sun-faded tee, steel-toe boots. She looked like she belonged in that rust-colored landscape. Her name was Ava Collins, 27 years old, a small-town mechanic with calloused hands and a quiet strength. She didn't say much, but when she did, people listened. Most folks in town only knew her as the girl who fixed engines at her late father's old garage, Collins & Co.'s Auto. But that day, she wasn't there to fix someone else's car. At the far end of the yard, buried beneath a jungle of twisted fenders and half-dead tires, was the husk of a car that looked more ghost than machine. It was a 1967 Chevy Impala, rusted to the bone, its windshield cracked like old glass, wheels sunken in the dirt. The yard manager laughed when she asked about it. "That heap, you can't fix what's already dead." Ava just ran her fingers over the battered hood and whispered, "Watch me." By the time the sky turned violet that evening, Ava had already signed the papers, handed over a wad of cash, and arranged for a tow truck to bring the car to her family's old shop. That night, the 1967 Chevy Impala sat in the center of the bay, its headlights empty, frame dented, and patches of rust eating through its soul. Most would have walked past it without a second glance. But to Ava, it wasn't a wreck. It was a promise. The garage had once been filled with laughter, country music, and the sound of her dad humming as he rebuilt engines like a man stitching stories into metal. But since he passed away 2 years ago, the place had grown cold and quiet. She'd kept it running. Sure, oil changes, brake jobs, the usual, but there was no fire anymore. Until now, she walked around the car slowly, her fingers tracing every line, dent, and scar. The smell of rust, grease, and old leather flooded her lungs like perfume. When she opened the trunk, a single crushed license plate fell out. Texas 67 Eleni 642. Ava held it in her hands like it was a relic from a forgotten life. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she pulled on her coveralls, rolled up the shop doors, and brought the lights to life. Shadows danced across the cracked concrete as she grabbed her dad's old socket wrench set, still labeled in his handwriting. She whispered under her breath, "Let's see what you've got left, girl." It began like most rebuilds do, with tearing down. The hood came off first, revealing an engine so caked in grime and dust it looked fossilized. She pulled the valve covers, stripped the belts, removed hoses one by one. Bolts that hadn't moved in decades resisted like old secrets. But Ava was patient. She didn't rush. Every part was cataloged, photographed, and laid out across her dad's old workbench, right beside a black and white photo of him holding a wrench, smiling with grease on his cheek. Every now and then, she'd pause, wipe her forehead, and glance at the photo. "You taught me to never quit," so I won't. In town, word got around fast. People whispered, "Ava's gone off the deep end. You hear she bought that Impala junk pile? She's working on it every night like it's some kind of mission." They didn't understand, because they didn't know about the drive she'd taken with her dad at 13, when he'd pulled over on a back road just so she could sit behind the wheel of his old Impala and learn how to shift gears for the first time. They didn't know about the promise she'd made at his hospital bedside one day. "I'll rebuild one, just like yours." This wasn't a project. It was her way back. As the days turned into weeks, the Impala began to change. Beneath the grime and corrosion, there was something beautiful. She replaced the floor pans, cut away rot from the frame, re-welded patches with sparks flying into the dark. Ava wasn't just good with her hands, she was precise, methodical. She reassembled the steering column by memory, rebuilt the carburetor with parts sourced from 3 different junkyards, and hand-polished the trim until it shone like chrome lightning. Still, it wasn't enough. There was a night, deep in February, when the engine refused to turn over for the 4th time in a row. Exhausted, she dropped to the floor, tears mixing with sweat and grease. The garage was cold. Her fingers ached. Her heart felt heavier than the V8 block sitting before her. She looked at the Impala and muttered, "Maybe everyone was right." And then she heard something. A soft click, followed by a low hum. The engine turned. Once, twice, then roared to life. It wasn't smooth. It coughed and growled like a bear coming out of hibernation. But it ran. And for the first time in years, Ava laughed a deep, cracked laugh that turned into sobs as the garage filled with smoke, noise, and light. That night, she stood in front of the car, engine purring behind her, looking up at the rafters where her dad's old work gloves still hung. "Did you see that?" "Dad," she whispered, "we're just getting started." By spring, the town had started paying attention. People who once walked past the garage without a second glance now slowed down. Some would even stop on the sidewalk, listening for that low, guttural rumble that occasionally escaped the half-closed shop doors. But Ava kept things quiet. She wasn't ready to show the world, not yet. Until one day, something unexpected happened. It was a Saturday morning. Ava had just finished installing the new rear suspension and was under the Impala tightening bolts when she heard the creak of the garage door opening. She rolled out from under the car, ready to tell whoever it was that they weren't taking walk-ins today, but froze when she saw the person standing in the doorway. It was Eleanor Hayes. Ava hadn't seen her in over a decade. Eleanor had been her dad's closest friend and a damn good mechanic in her own right. Back in the day, the two of them ran street races, fixed up cars, and laughed like siblings. But after Ava's dad passed, Eleanor left town. No one knew why. No one asked. No. Until now. She looked older, sure, grayer, thinner, a little more worn around the eyes, but she still had that spark. She stood silently for a second, taking in the shop, the smell of grease, the sight of the Impala. Then, almost like she was exhaling a memory, she smiled. "You brought it back," she said. Ava blinked. How did you know?" "I didn't," Eleanor replied, "but something told me it was time to come home." They stood there in silence for a long while. Then Ava gestured toward the engine and said softly, "Want to help me set timing?" That was it. No big reunion, no dramatic music, just 2 women, hands stained with oil, tuning an engine like time hadn't passed at all. As they worked, Eleanor shared stories Ava had never heard, about how her dad used to race a '67 Impala just like this one, how they'd rebuilt that car 3 different times because he couldn't bear to let it go, and how, on the night Ava was born. He missed the delivery because the car wouldn't start, and he swore that was the last time he ever let a machine outrank his family. They laughed, they cried a little. But that afternoon, something shifted. Ava realized this wasn't just her story anymore. The Impala wasn't just about her father, or keeping a promise. It had become something more, a living thread tying people together who had almost drifted apart. As the weeks rolled on, Eleanor kept coming back. Not every day, but enough to leave behind a cup of coffee, a new carburetor gasket, or just a word of encouragement. And slowly, more people followed. Teenagers from the high school auto shop would peek in. Wide-eyed, Mr. Dupre, the retired mailman, offered up his old polishing kit. A local artist painted a mural on the garage wall, a golden sun rising behind the silhouette of the Impala. But Ava remained focused. She still worked nights, sometimes until 3:00 mem. She replaced the front grille with one she'd restored by hand, stitched the seats using her mother's sewing machine, and sanded the body panel by panel until her fingers bled. And then the unexpected struck again. One morning, Ava opened the shop to find an envelope taped to the door. No return address. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a key. The note read, "A car like that deserves a road to run on. Check the lot behind Lambert's barn. It's yours now. An old friend." Ava's heart thudded. Lambert's barn sat 5 miles outside town, abandoned for years. She hadn't been back there since she was a child, back when her father took her on joyrides through the fields. She followed the directions that afternoon. Sure enough, behind the barn, weeds and dust covered what used to be a dirt track. With the key in hand, Ava unlocked the rusted gate and stepped inside. The space was silent, still, forgotten. But to her, it was a proving ground. A place where, maybe, just maybe, the Impala would ride again. It took Ava 3 days to clear the track behind Lambert's barn. She hauled away old fencing, pulled weeds by hand, and dragged a rusted tractor axle off the curve with the help of Eleanor and a borrowed winch. The whole time, she never said exactly what she was doing, but everyone could feel it. Something was coming. The day she brought the Impala out for its first test run, the town seemed to pause. Birds stilled. The air grew quiet, as if even the wind was holding its breath. She drove slowly, gravel crunching beneath the tires, the newly rebuilt engine humming like a promise. Eleanor stood at the gate, arms crossed, smiling like a proud mother hen. A few townsfolk had followed her out. Curious, a teenage boy leaned on his bike. An older couple sat on lawn chairs near the fence. Ava rolled down the window. "Let's see if she still remembers how to dance," she said softly. Then she tapped the throttle. The 1967 Chevy Impala roared, not like a scream, but like a declaration. It surged forward, and for a moment, time folded. The field, the barn, the wildflowers on the fence, they all blurred into motion. Ava didn't floor it. She didn't need to. It wasn't about speed. It was about motion, about life. With every turn, every smooth downshift, she wasn't just driving a machine. She was unraveling the knots in her chest, the ones that had tightened since her dad's funeral. She remembered his voice, his laughter, how he used to sing old Johnny Cash songs out of tune just to make her giggle. The Impala was no longer just a car. It had become a vessel for everything she couldn't say out loud. After 2 laps, she slowed and came to a gentle stop near the group. She stepped out, cheeks flushed, eyes glassy. "I think," she whispered, "she's ready." Someone clapped, then another. Not the kind of applause you hear at a show, but the kind people give when they're moved, when they've witnessed something sacred. That night, Ava didn't sleep. She sat on the shop floor, staring at the Impala under the soft flicker of a single light bulb. And she thought, for months, this had been about her and her father, about finishing what he started, about proving something. But now it felt bigger than that. Eleanor was the first to say it out loud, over breakfast at the corner diner 2 days later. "You ever think," she said, sipping her black coffee, "that maybe this wasn't just your journey?" Ava looked up. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Eleanor leaned in, "you lit something up in this town. You got kids talking about engines, grown men pulling out old toolboxes. Hell, even I dusted off my welding mask. And for what, a car?" Ava smiled. "It's not just a car." Exactly. That day, Ava left her half-eaten pancakes on the table and drove straight to the high school. She walked into the auto shop classroom and asked if she could speak to the students for a few minutes. The teacher, Mr. Pierce, a former student of her dad's, nodded slowly and stepped aside. She didn't have a speech prepared. She just looked at them, 6 teenagers in oil-stained uniforms, and said, "None of us are born knowing how to build something. But we all know what it feels like to want to fix what's broken." Silence. Then one kid raised his hand. "Can we come see the Impala?" Ava blinked, then smiled. "Yeah. You can—" That weekend, the garage was full again. Not with customers, not with noise, but with hope. Young hands holding tools for the first time. Old memories shared over greasy rags and socket wrenches. Eleanor showing 2 girls how to arc weld. Ava teaching a kid how to gap spark plugs. She didn't plan it. She didn't post about it. She just opened the doors and they came. And somewhere along the way, the question shifted from, can she rebuild it, to, what else can we rebuild together? 3 weeks later, a letter arrived. No fanfare. No stamp of approval. Just a plain white envelope tucked between the electric bill and a flyer for a tractor auction. Ava almost tossed it aside, until she noticed the return address. Lone Star Classic Auto Show, Houston, Texas. She tore it open with shaking hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a photo of her Impala taken from behind the fence at Lambert's barn. "We heard what you did. We've never invited a first-time builder before, but your story and your work deserve a place here. 1 car, 1 weekend, 1 shot." Ava stared at the letter for a long time. Her hands were trembling, not from fear, but from something deeper possibility. She read it again, then again. The Lone Star Show wasn't just any event. It was the most prestigious classic car gathering in the region. Thousands attended, big-name collectors, journalists, builders, even a few celebrities. The Impala would sit among legends' perfect restorations, million-dollar muscle cars, showroom masterpieces. And here she was, a girl from a dust-choked town with a rebuilt dream. Eleanor was the first to find out. She showed up at the garage that evening to find Ava pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "I can't go," Ava blurted out before Eleanor even said a word. "Why not?" Eleanor asked, leaning on the Impala. "I'm not ready." "It's not perfect. It still ticks weird when it's cold. The rear chrome is a little crooked." "And the paint?" Eleanor held up a hand. "Ava, stop." She looked her square in the eyes. "You didn't build this car for judges. You built it for you, for your dad, for everyone who never got the chance. Don't let fear take the wheel now." That night, they worked together until nearly dawn. They fine-tuned the carburetor, adjusted the suspension, rechecked every wire, and polished the body until it caught the moonlight like ocean glass. News spread like wildfire. The town buzzed. People dropped off baked goods, fuel cards, even a new tire gauge wrapped in a ribbon. Kids from the high school painted a banner. "Take her to Houston, Ava," and strung it across the garage. On the morning of the show, Ava wore her father's old shop jacket stitched with faded letters Collins & Co. Auto. She packed only what she needed: tools, spare parts, a thermos of coffee, and a folded photo of her dad tucked into the glove box. The drive to Houston took nearly 10 hours. Ava didn't rush. She let the Impala stretch its legs on long, open highways, the sun flickering through her window like a metronome. Every town she passed, people waved, truckers honked their horns. Even a biker gang gave her a thumbs up at a gas station. It was like the world had been waiting for this car to return. At the gates of the Lone Star Show, security almost didn't let her in until the coordinator appeared, wide-eyed. "You're the one with the Impala?" he asked. "We've been waiting for you." They gave her a corner spot, beneath an old oak tree, where the sunlight filtered through the leaves in soft, golden patterns. Not front and center, but just right. She parked, turned off the engine, stepped out, and waited. It didn't take long. People noticed. Not because the Impala was flashy, but because it wasn't. It didn't scream, "Look at me." It whispered, "Come closer." There's a story here. Car enthusiasts circled. Photographers snapped pictures. A father knelt beside his daughter and said, "That's what real craftsmanship looks like." A woman in her 60s wiped her eyes. "My brother had one just like it. He never got to finish it." Ava didn't say much. She just stood beside the car, answering a few questions, hands still stained with grease, heart still beating fast. But as the day went on, the fear that once gripped her chest began to loosen. This wasn't just a show. It was a moment, a turning point, a mirror. Because in that crowd, Ava didn't just see strangers admiring a car. She saw pieces of her story reflected in them, the builders who never had the tools, the daughters who lost their fathers, the dreamers who gave up too soon. And for the first time since she bought the wreck, Ava realized she hadn't just rebuilt the Impala. She'd rebuilt herself. Ava stayed at the show long after the crowd thinned. The late sun was dipping low over the Houston skyline, casting a warm orange glow across the parking lot. The Impala sat quietly under the oak tree, dappled in shadows and light, like a painting caught between memory and reality. She ran her fingers along the curve of the rear fender, still slightly crooked, still imperfect. But that didn't matter anymore. Not here. Not now. Someone approached. A man in his early 60s, wearing a pressed button-down and a straw hat, stopped a few feet away. His voice was gentle, southern, full of weight. "You the one who rebuilt this beauty?" Ava nodded. He looked over the Impala with reverence. Then he said, "My brother died in one just like it, 1974, hit by a drunk driver. I haven't stood this close to one since." Silence hung between them like a shared breath. "I used to think I'd never want to see another one." He continued. "But this feels different. This feels like healing." Ava couldn't speak. Her throat tightened. She simply reached out and rested a hand on the car, as if to say, "Me too." After he walked away, she stood there alone for a while, letting the wind move through her braid, letting the moment settle into her bones. The show ended without ribbons or trophies. She didn't care, because she hadn't come for that. The drive home was quiet and strangely light. There was no pressure in her chest anymore, no second-guessing, no lingering weight. Just rhythm, just road, just peace. Back in Marfa, Ava returned to the garage expecting the same silence that had greeted her every day for years. But it wasn't silent anymore. There were people waiting. Teenagers on bikes, local dads with toolboxes, a mom with her 2 daughters, each holding a wrench like they already knew what it was for. The banner the kids had made. "Take her to Houston." Ava was now painted over with a new message. "Memory shop, open to all." She didn't plan that name. Someone just wrote it on the garage chalkboard one day, and it stuck. So she left it there. The days that followed were the kind you don't notice slipping by. But something was always happening. She taught a boy how to change his first tire, helped a widow find the VIN number on her late husband's El Camino, rewired an old motorcycle with 2 high school girls who swore they hated grease but kept coming back anyway. Eleanor came by often, sometimes to teach, sometimes just to sit on the stool in the corner, sipping iced tea and listening to classic rock on the old radio. The garage became something sacred, not because of what it was, but because of what it meant. A place where stories were rebuilt alongside engines. A place where old pain got scrubbed away with steel wool and gasoline. A place where you didn't have to be perfect, you just had to try. And Ava? She changed too. She no longer apologized for knowing more than the guys who doubted her. She no longer flinched when asked to speak in front of others. She stood taller, talked slower, let herself laugh louder. Because something had shifted deep inside, something rooted and permanent. One night, while closing up the shop, she found an old cassette buried in her dad's toolbox. It was labeled "For Ava Play, This When You're Ready." Hands trembling, she dusted off her father's cassette deck, plugged in the cord, and hit play. There was static at first. Then his voice. "Hey kiddo, if you're hearing this, I guess I'm gone. But I wanted to say something. Don't just fix cars. Fix what's broken in people. Start with yourself if you have to, but never stop building. You were born for it." Ava sat there for hours, not crying, not talking, just listening to the voice, to the message, to the sound of a heart still beating through old magnetic tape. By the time the cassette clicked off, the garage was dark. But inside her, something was burning brighter than ever. She stood up, took one last look at the Impala, then flipped off the lights and whispered to the shadows. "All right, Dad, let's build something bigger." That summer, the garage never really closed. The doors stayed open late into the night. The hum of impact wrenches and blues guitar riffs drifting through the warm air like smoke. Ava had stopped calling it Collins & Co. months ago. Around town, everyone just called it the Memory Shop. No sign, no logo, just a feeling. And people kept coming. A teenage girl named Lily, who'd never held a socket wrench in her life, now knew how to drop a transmission. A retired mailman brought in a rusted 72 C10 and spent every Saturday sanding it down, even though his hands shook from arthritis. Ava's neighbor, Mr. Garrett, who hadn't spoken more than a few words since his wife passed, started showing up with coffee and stories about the Chevelle he once loved. None of them came because they wanted a perfect car. They came because something inside them needed fixing, too. And Ava, she never once asked for payment. All she asked was that they show up. One day, a reporter from a regional auto magazine showed up unannounced. He wore a clean polo shirt and carried a DSLR camera like it was a badge. He introduced himself, then pointed to the Impala parked under the open garage bay. "Is this the car that went to the Lone Star show?" Ava wiped her hands on her coveralls. "Yeah." He looked impressed. "Mind if I do a story on it? On you?" Ava glanced towards the group of kids tuning a dirt bike. Then toward Eleanor, who was hunched over a carburetor with 2 high schoolers. Then she looked back at the reporter and simply said, "Only if it's about them." The article came out 2 weeks later. The mechanic who rebuilt more than a car. It didn't go viral. It didn't make headlines. But it reached the right people. Within months, old friends from across the state began showing up. Former students of Ava's father. Ex-mechanics who had given up on their shops. Women who had always been told they didn't belong near engines. One brought a 1965 Falcon with its roof crushed in. Another brought nothing but a steering wheel and a dream. And somehow, Ava found a way to say yes to all of them. The memory shop grew not with size, but with soul. Someone donated new lifts. Another brought in an old jukebox. One night, a woman named Grace painted a mural on the back wall, a silhouette of the Impala rising from the desert, surrounded by golden light and wildflowers. It said, "What we rebuild, rebuilds us." Ava didn't talk much about what started it all. She rarely mentioned her father in front of others, but everyone could feel him there, in the way she tightened bolts, in the old vinyl jazz record spinning in the corner, in the quiet patience she showed when teaching a kid how to thread a spark plug. She carried him in her fingertips. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the hills, Eleanor stood next to her in the doorway of the garage, arms crossed, eyes misty. "You know what you've done, don't you?" she asked. Ava shook her head. "I just fixed a car." Eleanor chuckled. "No, you built a cathedral out of rust and memory. You gave people a reason to believe again." Ava didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The sounds around them said it all: laughter, the hiss of compressed air, the low rumble of a rebuilt engine, the scratch of a teenager's pen drawing wiring diagrams on a notepad. This wasn't about horsepower anymore. It was about healing. And that night, long after the last car rolled out and the lights dimmed, Ava stood alone beside the 1967 Chevy Impala. She reached into the glove box and pulled out the old photo of her father standing in front of his first rebuild, arms slung over the hood like it was his best friend. She smiled, then tucked the photo into a tiny frame on the dash, not as a tribute, but as a compass, because she wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Tomorrow, someone new would walk through those doors, holding a broken piece of something that used to mean everything. And Ava would be there, with open hands, open heart, and just enough grease under her nails to start again. Not everything that's broken is meant to be thrown away. Sometimes, it's meant to be rebuilt not because it's easy, not because it's quick, but because the process of restoring something forgotten can heal what we didn't even know was fractured inside ourselves. Ava Collins didn't set out to inspire a town. She wasn't chasing a trophy or seeking attention. She just wanted to keep a promise to her father. But along the way, she discovered something greater: that rebuilding isn't about the past, it's about the future. The 1967 Chevy Impala became more than a car. It became a reminder that legacies don't live in objects. They live in hands, in stories, in second chances we choose to take. And maybe, just maybe, the courage to turn one rusted bolt can be the spark that restores a community, a soul, or even a forgotten part of ourselves. The end. Up next, 2 more true stories about courage, connection, and second chances. Click to keep building with us, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe what's broken can still be made beautiful.